These are 6 hives. I'll be building up. You can see a couple of them have an extra box on the top. That's actually called a honey super. So this time of year is when nectar is available. So bees always store honey at the top of their hive. So the beekeeper takes these boxes and adds boxes. As they fill one up, you add another one, and bees just naturally fill all the space they have. And they work so hard. I mean, I feel a little guilty taking their honey, but they store way more than they need, you know, for a healthy colony. So there's kind of 2 groups of beekeepers, people like me, although I'm probably kind of on the large size in terms of a hobbyist. But then you've got commercial beekeepers that their main income is by having a whole bunch of hives, and they typically move them all around the country because they make money by providing pollination services. Mm-hmm. So some of the issues that's happening to the honeybee, we call it the 4 Ps. So it's parasites and pathogens. So there's a mite that's become a real troublesome parasite called the varroa mite. And so you've got a mite that attacks a bee and attaches itself to a bee. So how do you kill a bug on a bug? It's difficult. And the mites have, you know, evolved with the miticides we've tried, and I don't use any chemicals in my hives. I use all natural methods to try to. So then there's the pathogens. So the mites actually transfer diseases to the bees because they actually bite into the bee and connect to the blood of the bee. So they spread diseases to the bee. It just weakens the bee overall. And then another one of the P's is pesticides. So our economy, you know, is based now on everybody sprays their lawn. Every big farm, every big crop, you know, seeds are now coated with pesticides already on the seed. So you walk a typical commercial farm crop, there's no weeds. You know, it's just corn or it's just beans or whatever. And unfortunately, if the bees come in contact with those plants, that herbicide and pesticide is part of every part of the plant. It's in the DNA of the plant. Pesticides are a problem because if there's elements of the pesticide in the pollen, well, now they're feeding the baby bees a little bit of this pesticide, which again, is one more thing that kind of weakens the hive, adds stress to the hive. Poor nutrition is another one of the P's. We've lost a lot of habitat. These farm fields that used to have weeds in the, you know, kind of between the rows, thistles and things like that, which actually attract bees, they're not there anymore. We spray yards. I always tell the story about when I was a little kid, I played sandlot baseball in a field across from my house, and the field was covered with clover. And we used to play and think, oh, there's all these bees were on the clover, and oh, we're going to get stung. And I realize now as a beekeeper, you know, everybody's yard had clover in it, and now hardly any yards have clover. So we've lost a lot of habitat that bees like, and that affects their nutrition. And the last P is practices of beekeepers. So not so much people like me, but more the commercial beekeepers that are trucking thousands of hives across the country for pollination services. So it's interesting to know that around Valentine's Day every year, 2/3 of all managed beehives are in California for almonds. So there's 1.6 million colonies, hives of bees in it's pretty big area. It's the size of Massachusetts. It's how big the almond crop is. But there's just bees everywhere, and it's for about a 2 or 3 week period that they're there. And when they're done pollinating almonds, they'll move them somewhere else to pollinate the next crop. But we say that 1 out of every 3 bites of food in America, probably even worldwide, is pollinated by the honeybee. And it's usually the good stuff. It's your fruits and vegetables. You know, obviously corn and beans and things like that are wind pollinated, but the good food that we all really like is really dependent on honeybees. And so the fact that the honeybees are in decline or under a lot of stress is something to pay attention to. We got to have them. It's not like, you know, you can say, well, we should stop commercial beekeeping, because now we're to the point where we got to have honeybees pollinating these crops, because, you know, our food system is dependent on those crops. So it's just kind of like many things in the environment and in human interaction with the environment, you know, where do you draw the line in terms of what's too much consumption, what's the right balance, you know, how much of the environment should we be using beyond what sustainable requirements would be. Of course, we have more people on the planet all the time, so, you know, how do you feed all those people? So it's a challenge, and like everything I'm sure you've studied this semester, it's like, yeah, things are kind of off kilter a little bit in terms of balance. So. How many flights of bees have to happen before you've got 40 pounds of honey stored away? I mean, it's literally millions and millions of flights to different flowers. And the other thing you guys might like is 90% of the bees in a hive are females. Females are worker bees. They do all the work. The queen, of course, is the top female, and she lays up to 1,500 eggs every day. Her job is to continually to produce more bees, because the bees work so hard they only live 4 to 6 weeks. Natural honey, or raw honey, is, you know, it has all the pollen, it has, you know, the enzymes and things that are actually healthy for you. It makes it a much better food.
Nectar is like a carbohydrate, and bees store honey to survive the winter. They work hard during the summer and store so much honey to prepare.
All natural local honey is good for people with allergies because it contains pollen from native plant species. So those with allergies will eventually build up a resistance to the pollen. A strong beehive produces 80 to 100 pounds of honey a day. You can identify where honey comes from due to what pollen is in it. And grocery store honey you can't, because it's refined so much that there's no pollen left. Honey has also been used for centuries as a wound treatment or antibacterial. Bees are attracted to plants with medicinal qualities, such as mint, lavender, or sage.
Yeah, I lost 4 hives.
Oh, you lost 4.
Yep.
Wow.
Actually, these hives are new startups for me. All 6 of these. These 2 hives I bought from a beekeeper in Huntington, whose bees were in Texas over the winter. Not just because of the cold, but also the 4 Ps. You know, the bees are just, they're not as easily kept as maybe they were 20, 30 years ago, because of the mites and the more pesticide use and things like that, just in the last 20 or 30 years. Now, colony collapse disorder is, you know, the big news for bees, and I'm not sure that I've experienced it personally. I have had hives that have sort of, I don't want to use the word collapse, but sort of dwindled quickly. Again, we don't know exactly how to stop colony collapse disorder, but it's been a big deal for some of these commercial beekeepers where they lose 1,000 hives in a span of a week. And the thing with colony collapse disorder is the bees fly off and they don't come back. And so you had 60,000 bees and now you have 1,000. And it's kind of inexplicable what happened to the bees. Yeah, because whatever you use in managing the hives becomes part of the wax and becomes part of the honey. So, like most food, you know, you don't really know what you're eating, but you know, it accumulates over time. So if you're eating organic, that's usually a good thing because at least you think you're getting less of, you know, pesticides and chemicals and things like that. Right next to each other, they always go back to their own hive. They kind of have a GPS system, so they navigate using the sun, so they only fly during the day. And the queen emits a pheromone, kind of a scent, and so they can always identify their hive by the queen's pheromone. So if something happens to the queen, that's bad. Bees that are out flying around, their job is to forage. And they're actually the older bees. The bees kind of go, during their lifetime, they may start out as nurse bees and taking care of the queen and doing things in the hive, and they sort of evolve to leaving the hive and becoming foragers. So they bring the nectar back, and then the nectar gets stored in the right spot, and it might be 3 or 4 weeks before the moisture content is enough for me to actually take some of it if I want to. And it was a little more rural. It was very typical for every farm to have, you know, 2 or 3 beehives, and you didn't have to do anything to them. They didn't have the diseases. We didn't have the varroa mite. They were just there every year, and Grandma and Grandpa went out once a year and took some honeycomb out, and it's like, oh, we got honey from our beehive. But now there are less people that casually kept bees before, and now it's much more. You got to be more involved and manage the bees and take care of them for them to survive. And there's less commercial beekeepers too, which, again, you start talking about the whole food system. We need more food, not less food. If fewer commercial beekeepers are finding, you know, they can't make a living doing it, then that's trouble. There's very few wild or feral bee colonies anymore because of all the 4 Ps. They kind of need we need to help them. So those bees that were on all the clover where I played baseball as a kid were probably wild bees, but they're not there anymore.